The following is a project of our nonprofit newsroom. Support Midcoast Morning and local community-centered journalism today by signing up to be a monthly sustaining donor at chly.ca/donate. It doesn't take much money to support local news.
Hello and welcome to Midcoast Morning. I'm Joe Q. Permitting delays and cost uncertainty are impacting home builders on Vancouver Island. The Nanaimo Chamber of Commerce gathered contractors and other key players in the construction industry together Tuesday for an Island Housing Solutions Roadmap event at the Coast Bastion Hotel. I went to the event halfway through the day. I spoke with Mark Bernhardt, president of the Canadian Homebuilders Association of BC.
I'm Mark Bernhardt. I am president of Bernhardt Contracting. We're primarily an energy consultant, and we work all across the province. We serve everything south of Prince George. In my spare time, I'm also president of the Canadian Homebuilders Association of BC, where it's a volunteer position, and I've served a year term. I'm just about to pass the reins to the next person in a couple of weeks.
And you and a number of folks are gathered here at the Coast Bastion to talk about the issues facing the home building industry on Vancouver Island. What are you hearing from people so far, and I guess in your role as president?
Well, right now I'm manning the energy efficiency and building science table here, which is kind of focuses on my area of expertise, and it's really interesting what we're hearing, because over the last few years there's been a lot of code changes, particularly around that sort of building science world, where we're talking energy efficiency and things like that, reducing our carbon emissions, and it's interesting to hear builders talk about actually it's been a relatively easy transition for the most part. There's some concerns around the edges here and there, but for the most part. These codes were designed by builders for builders, which is a real change from the way we've done building codes in the past. And that's made it a lot easier for us. They're phased in, and so you can have time to learn and figure out how to do it before you're actually, pounding nails on the house.
We were hearing a presentation on some of the changes to the building code, and there was an exchange. There was a gentleman in the audience who was saying, well, I can cool my house with a fan. It seems silly that the code would require me to have some kind of cooling put in there when I build it, and all this nickel and diming bureaucracy is going to add up and make the cost of building homes a lot higher. What is the response to that kind of sentiment?
Well, it's very common, and I enjoy arguing, so I always enjoy it when things like this come about. It's a very common thing to say, well, it's, the individual code in itself, well, maybe that's only this tiny little bit, but it's this tiny little bit 100 times. Now all of a sudden we've got a real problem. That particular cooling code, that is something that CHBA has been working on across the country for a long time. And, there's this real clear safety issue where a bunch of people died in the last heat dome. And of course, we don't want that to happen again. So we've got to do something to make sure that that's not happening. Unfortunately, with this one, it is kind of a blanket approach, and it's going all houses, pretty strictly. And, there's some complications that we're hitting that make it not very flexible and perhaps not really hitting the mark on where we need to be. Most of those people that died in that heat dome were in high-rise buildings, particularly in older buildings. As far as I know, nobody in a single-family home or even small townhomes, suffered any sort of real problems there. Now, that's not to say we don't want people to be comfortable in their homes. People should be comfortable in their homes. And with climate change, this problem's only going to get worse. So cooling in your homes is definitely a best practice. Whether we need to be as severe as the code is right now, that's probably, I think, debatable. What the Home Builders Association would like to see this code be is a provision for cooling, so that when you build a new home, you wire in and you put conduits in so that you could add cooling without doing any sort of damage. You don't have to do structural, changes or anything like that. You could just add it if you need it. And that would be a lot more flexible approach. It would save some costs for some people, but still give you the ability to cool that home should you need it.
You were mentioning during the talk today that the three biggest industries on Vancouver Island are education, government services, and people who come here with big bags of money. How does that impact the home building and the construction industry here?
Well, it's very different from a lot of the other places in the province, right? Where you think of like a place like Prince George, right, is very reliant on the big mills. And so if the mill closes, that's a big problem for the town, obviously. So they're in many ways more affected by, things that Trump is doing and their sort of international markets and things like that. Here on Vancouver Island, it is quite unique, right? There's the old joke that it's newlyweds and nearly deads, right? And, people come here to retire and, maybe to start a career and things as well. But it is a very expensive place to live. And regardless of home costs, in general, it is a very expensive place to live. And so what we see in the stats from people coming here and building houses, it is people with money. It's people from other provinces with money, people from around the provinces with money. And that really puts us in a bit of a strange spot here on the island where we're not really affected by some of the big economic factors and the, things that we might see in other places. Like you think of manufacturing in Ontario, they're very vulnerable to international markets, whereas we're really not here on Vancouver Island. We're much more vulnerable to sort of sentiment rather than actual economic problem.
So what then is the purpose of this conference? What is the big problem everyone is gathered here to try and solve?
I believe it's affordability in general. And, builders, the common thing is, well, if builders, if houses are more expensive, that may be somehow beneficial to the builder because, there's more money going through the builder. And in some cases, maybe that's true, but there's a point at which nobody can afford to build houses anymore. And then what are we doing? Then we're all out of work. And I think we're getting close to that line, at least. I mean, certainly there is still people building houses here, but it is just so expensive that, in order to do that, you have to be a very rich person. Probably you have to have intergenerational wealth. And that just means we don't have many clients. There's not many people that can afford to build a house. And it's not any one thing, I don't think. And that's why I think sessions like this are important because there's so many different aspects of it, right? There's utilities, there's codes, there's, materials, there's all these different things that go into the cost of a house. Like, one of the big ones right now is government fees. A significant portion of the cost of a house is government fees. So, taxes, municipal fees, things like that. And so, you can tackle one piece, but it's not the whole pie. And that's what we're doing here today is tackling that bigger pie. Is there a percentage here, a percentage there that we can take out of that bigger pie and maybe build, if not cheaper houses, better houses.
So people obviously are very aware that it's incredibly expensive to buy a home. It's also incredibly expensive to build a home right now. What are the biggest limiting factors? I know you said there's a cavalcade of them, and that's kind of the reason for today.
Yeah, I mean, there's, you pick from the list, right? There's hundreds of different reasons. Material costs are up, and it's not just because of tariffs. They're up across for various different reasons. Tariffs are one of the big, more recent issues. But cost of labor as well. I mean, if you're going to build houses here, you've got to live here, and you've got to be paid well enough to do that. So labor costs are very high as well. There's the cost of design and all these different things. There's municipalities require a very high level of sophistication in the design. And that's expensive. A lot of engineering that goes into it as well. So all of those things are very expensive. I think that one of the things you're really going to see in the larger projects in particular, the towers, the maybe the smaller apartment buildings, is that they may become stalled, not because there isn't zoning permission or permits or people to fill them. There's in fact lots of demand around. Demand is not our problem, but the cost of delivery is high. And so if I'm a builder looking at a project, particularly a big one, if I can't build it for what I can sell it for, I'm not going to build it. So, for example, if I'm building a duplex and I have to sell each one of the sides of the duplexes for $1 million a side, I don't think I can sell it for that. So I'm just not going to build it. And that's how big projects become stalled.
I was at a table with a number of folks who just own construction companies, and we were speaking with someone from the Nanaimo Chamber of Commerce, and they were sort of asking, what are the biggest issues you face? And pretty much everyone agreed on the same thing. It was the length of time it takes for them to put a permit in at the RDN and get it approved. They were saying that takes them around 4 months. Sometimes it's almost as long as it takes to build the thing. Is that an issue you're aware of and you're following and you can speak to?
Absolutely. Yeah. Major issue, permit times. Time is money, right? If I'm buying a lot, I'm paying interest on that, significantly so. Maybe if I'm doing a custom home for somebody, if they've got a mortgage, they're paying interest on that waiting time. It's very, very expensive. We've had it on our own projects be to the point where we can't build the project anymore because it's been such a long delay, and we have to sell that lot and take a loss on things, and that is common. So permitting risk or length of time, permitting risk is a huge issue. There is just recently a benchmarking study, which I definitely would encourage everybody to look at. The CHBA national office just did a benchmarking study that covers the whole country, and it ranks different municipalities on, first of all, their speed of permits, how much they're charging for those permits, which can be quite significant, as well as some other innovation that they're doing it in there. And it's no surprise cities like Vancouver are lowest on the list, where it can take over a year for a permit. Victoria somewhere in the middle, and other places higher or lower on that list as well.
Everyone was citing Langford and Calgary as cities where this is maybe easier to do than it is here. But maybe could you just give me a sense of, for people who aren't in the industry or haven't tried to, have a second suite built on their home or anything recently, what are the things that are in this permitting approval process? People were talking about, well, we already have zoning laws, and we already have an engineer signing off on the thing who is going to be liable. What are the things that local governments are looking for that are making these permits kind of have wait times?
Yeah, well, I think you bring up a good point. There's a lot of overlap there, right? If we've got an engineer designing the structure, the engineer outranks the city official in terms of skill. And so, why are we having a city approve a structural plan when they don't actually have the authority to do so? And that's really what we're seeing is it's multiple checks and checks and checks and checks and document. And there's a lot of things that just aren't really that relevant. So for your average single family home in Victoria or Nanaimo or wherever, typically you're going to need a geotechnical engineer. You're going to need a structural engineer. If you're doing any sort of different type of building, you might need an envelope engineer. If any sort of complex building, it's going to be also include an electrical and a mechanical engineer. Each one of these is a cost. Each one of these people, technically outranks a building inspector in terms of their skill. Yet we're still seeing cities reviewing all those plans and actually checking all of those plans. And that's a huge time delay. In many cases, cities have been struggling to hire staff. And so that slowed them down. And then now that we maybe in some cases have hired staff, that staff is new and may not be entirely familiar with, norms, codes, all those sorts of things. So we, in our own work particularly, we do commonly find where a city may reject a plan, yet the plan is correct, and we are in the position where we have to, correct the city for their assumptions that they've made, and that's not uncommon. It's and it's just delay, right? And now you're another couple of weeks in the cycle of getting that plan back in. In some cities, they're also doing sort of really inefficient processes where a permit might come in and it goes from one desk to the next rather than all of them at the same time. There's no reason it can't go to everybody. Other silly things such as, in my home district of Saanich, everything has to go to the Parks Department for a check, even if it's a parking lot with no trees on it. And that just doesn't make any sense, right? We can be more efficient about how we handle permits and how they go through the system.
If it is, as you say, and there are a lot of inefficiencies within the kind of internal bureaucracy of municipal governments, how can any of us contribute to resolving that problem?
Well, I think there's a certain amount of we can do. Certainly, voting is the best way to go, and we as citizens control our municipalities through voting. And I think looking for candidates who are going to take a deep look at the municipal process, who are going to be able to stand up to the NIMBYs in the room, because that is, I think, one of the reasons a lot of this bureaucracy gets created. Is if there's people down at City City Hall shouting about, oh, we don't want this, we don't want this. Well, municipal staff are going to be worried and making sure that everything is absolutely perfect before it goes out the door. And that just isn't realistic and takes a huge amount of time. And it doesn't need to be absolutely perfect. And so I think that's how that bureaucracy gets created and layered on, because the cities are trying to protect themselves from the citizens. And they need the city councils in order to back them up and stand up for the staff and the policies that they've done. I haven't been to a city council in recent times where they haven't said, we want good, gentle density and all these things that people talk about. But it is often the case where, city staff don't get the backing from council when somebody comes and complains. And I think that's too bad.
Can you give me an example of what is a thing that is at stake or controversial in one of these applications? Well,
there's a really good example just recently from my home district of Saanich. There was an application to redevelop, a bigger development on one of the major corners. And there were some towers proposed and things like that. And it's not going to get built overnight. It's probably a 10-year plan kind of thing. There was a few residents that gathered together, a very loud group, made a lot of protests, actually put out quite a lot of false information. And they took that to city council. And in previous years, I think that false information really would have swayed council, and council would have then been afraid. There's this big group of voters in front of me saying all these terrible things that sounds horrendous. I'm going to vote against this development. And that's how it would have traditionally done. I was really proud to see the mayor stand up and say, no, this is false information. And we don't need to have this here, and made sure everybody knew what the real information was. And I was really proud of that, actually. I was really impressed by that. And that's not common. I think that needs to be more common throughout all municipalities. If we could do that, we could change the NIMBY culture a lot and have people start to look seriously at developments for what they do and what they don't do. There's a time when maybe a development's not appropriate, and there's a time when it is. And I think residents of communities need to take the time to understand what the difference is.
So all of these builders are here gathered together to try and figure out ways to reduce the cost of building stuff. What do you hope comes out of today?
I'd like to see some real nice insights and nuggets that we can take and use as an association for our advocacy. That's why we do these things, right? We can go and we say, well, we talked to our membership and here's 5 great ideas that they had. And I can take that to the housing minister and say, hey, housing minister, here's some great ideas. What about this? And we'll take it to the housing minister. We'll take it to the opposition. We'll take it to everybody, because there's no monopoly on good ideas, right? We want everybody to have it. And if we can get that out and create some positive change for our industry, that's why we're here.
We're still only halfway through the day. Do you have any of those 5 good ideas yet that you can share?
Well, we're hearing certainly that people have implemented these performance-based codes fairly well, and particularly when they're phased in. And so for those out there that don't know what a performance-based code is, it's, traditionally we've said a wall code you would require 3 nails and a certain number of 2x4s to hold it up. But really the goal is to make a wall that is strong and will stand up. And so if you tell me, well, make a wall that is strong and will stand up, I can do that in 100 different ways. And one of those ways is probably pretty cost effective. And so a transition from prescriptive saying, you must do exactly this thing and more into that performance-based code, I think will be an advantage going forward. We can be flexible, we can be innovative, and that'll give us a lot more flexibility. So I'm hopeful that, we can do something there. I think we're also seeing a real push for some education as well. Knowledge is power, and we can do a lot if builders are very well trained. We already have builder licensing here in BC where training is mandatory, and certainly we're hearing from builders that the training is effective and useful, and the more we can do, the better there.
Mark Bernhardt is president of the Canadian Homebuilders Association of BC. We were speaking Tuesday at the Coast Bastion Hotel at an Island Housing Solutions Roadmap event put on by the Nanaimo Chamber of Commerce.
Midcoast Morning is made possible by the Community Radio Fund of Canada and generous listeners like you. With your support, we can expand Midcoast Morning from 2 to 3 original programs per week to cover local news, current affairs, and arts and culture.
On Tuesday, a group of home builders gathered at the Coast Bastion Hotel in Nanaimo to take part in an event hosted by the Chamber of Commerce. Called the Island Housing Solutions Roadmap, its goal was to address affordability concerns for builders of housing I spoke with Jamie Kuhn, president of the Canadian Homebuilders Association of Vancouver Island.
Yeah, my name is Jamie Kuhn. I am the CHBA president for Vancouver Island, and I'm also owner of Pheasant Hill Homes here in Nanaimo.
And folks are gathered here today to talk about improving affordability within the construction sector, as in how to build homes for less. Can you tell me about what are the challenges on that front right now?
Yeah, I guess the biggest challenge right now is the looming tariffs, and that's kind of the hot button issue right now for affordability. It was already something that we were recovering from COVID, was the affordability with just wages going up and supply chain issues and lots of different prices going up on materials and all that. So now with the tariffs, I think every builder, including us and people that want to build homes, whether they're doing a custom home or doing spec building or commercial building or multi-family stuff, it's obviously a little bit of fear involved there of what's going to happen and how this is going to affect the price of homes.
Could you give me a sense of just how much maybe in the supply chain does come from the United States would be affected by these proposed tariffs?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't know. It's not really something that we've looked into. Most of our projects, with free trade, or at least what we thought was free trade, it wasn't really an issue. So for some specific clients, they want to get specific things from Canada. Others want to go overseas to Europe. But as far as most clients are just looking for the best deal for what they want and what they want to accomplish on their home. So to be honest, I don't really have a sense because it's not really something we've looked into as a company until now. And now it's something that we're talking to all our clients about. What can we order now before the tariffs come in, and what can we shift to more Canadian or European markets?
Do you have a sense of when you might know? How is the news about these tariffs? It feels like it evolves every day, every week. On your front, are you hearing things beyond what you hear in the media? How are you experiencing this?
Yeah, as the president of the CHPA, there's been lots of conversations with other builders, with our clients, and also as a board in the CHPA here, and other people in the financial sector, and looking at what's going to happen. I think everybody just kind of feels like there's going to be some pain and there's going to be some innovation that needs going to happen. And there is a sense from a lot of people I talk to within the building community that there is going to be some good that comes out of this. There is going to be some innovative ways to find materials that maybe are not in American markets, maybe going overseas, maybe interprovincial trade. So we feel like there is going to be some solutions, and I think COVID proved that we can shift and we can find ways to find solutions to these issues. But there is going to be some short-term pain, I think.
On that idea of innovation solutions, what we can control and do about this, are there any specifics? Could you give me an idea of what that could look like?
Yeah, I think it's just finding ways to find supplies that maybe are more local, that might cost a little bit more than it typically would, but still give us some solutions to finding materials, maybe finding some innovative ways to build, finding materials that are going to work. But I think in some cases it is just going to cost more, and then there's going to be lots that we're going to find out that certain materials and stuff that did come from the States, and if they're tariffed, it's going to cost more, and so we're going to have to find ways to continue to innovate, to try to find ways to bring down the price of building.
Can you give me a sense of the relationship between the price of building maybe various forms of housing right now on Vancouver Island versus your ability to sell that housing to people in a realistic way and turn a profit such that you can continue to exist?
Yeah, typically for us, we do custom homes and custom renovations. So unfortunately for those that are wanting to build and renovate, the cost is going to be passed on to them. And so that's going to make it more difficult for people. And I think that's right now what I find in the market is people are kind of just waiting to see what happens before they decide to build or renovate.
So if you were talking about your supply versus demand, the biggest factor right now impacting you is this uncertainty and people saying, whoa, let's see how this plays out?
Yeah, I would say so. I even say that the uncertainty has started to the middle of last year. People were uncertain about the American election. They were uncertain about the Canadian election looming whenever that's going to happen. And so a lot has even changed since last summer. I feel like here on Vancouver Island that there still is lots of people that want to build and lots of people that want to renovate their homes. I get the sense that a lot of people are just waiting to see what happens. I feel like at some point this year, maybe with what happens with interest rates, as there is rumors of them going down, maybe even as low as 2% or 1.5%, like it did during COVID, that there will be a moment when, there is more people wanting to move here and build. But I think during uncertain times, most of those people will wait and see what happens until there's more stability in the market.
If you were talking to those people who maybe do want to renovate their homes and are unsure of this uncertainty, what would you say to them?
Well, in my experience, I've been in the construction industry for 12 years, and I can tell you that it's not going to get cheaper. So now would be a better time to start than it would be to wait. In all my years, I've never seen it actually go down in price. It's only gone up. So historical data would suggest that the better time to start to build is now, not tomorrow.
A big part of the reason folks are gathered here today is to try and maybe share their experiences and come up with solutions on that front in the first half of today. Have you heard any new, maybe innovative ideas, or maybe even just big roadblocks people are facing that you think it's important to share and talk more about?
Yeah, I think the general consensus at my table will be it's still permitting and all the red tape that we have to jump through as builders. It seems to be always changing, and that seems to be the most frustration from a builder's perspective is how much things are changing and what the cost is for home builders. I mean, tariffs is something that we're discussing, but I would say it's more on just the bureaucracy and the hoops that we have to jump through as builders to try to develop land and try to get building permits, and more and more costs are being pushed onto the homeowners in order for us to get proper designs and get permits and then follow through with those with the municipalities.
Jamie Kuhn is president of the Vancouver Island chapter of the Canadian Homebuilders Association. That's our show for the day. Thank you for joining me. I'm Joe Pugh, host and producer of Midcoast Morning. Jesse Woodward is our executive producer, and RB Frew is our technical advisor. You can sign up for CHLY's newsletter at chly.ca/subscribe for updates from our nonprofit newsroom and more. Our theme song is First One by local Nanaimo band Waste Management. If you have a story you'd like us to cover, email us at news@chly.ca. That's all for now. I'll talk to you on another Midcoast Morning.
Midcoast Morning would not be possible without the funding of the Community Radio Fund of Canada's Radio Meters program and listeners like you. Midcoast Morning is a project of CHLY's nonprofit newsroom. Support nonprofit journalism in Nanaimo and on the Salish Sea today by becoming a monthly sustaining donor at $5 or more per month. Support the program at chly.ca/donate. Finally, this program acknowledges and gives thanks to the Nanaimo First Nation as we broadcast and podcast from their traditional territory. Thanks for listening.